Wardrobe malfunctions that actors regret to this day. Making a movie is a huge project, and plenty of people on set have different jobs to ensure things go smoothly. The costume department is responsible for dressing the actors to fit their part, and they make sure that the cast looks perfect before going on set to film. Although most costume designers are great at their jobs, there are times when something slips through the cracks. Here are some wardrobe malfunctions that actors regret to this day, and the costume designers who regret them. Raiders of the Lost Ark. Steven Spielberg's Indiana Jones franchise is incredible, and each movie is filled with action and adventure. Unfortunately, there was a wardrobe malfunction in the film that isn't too hard to spot. There are locals nearby in the scene where Indy is nursing his drink after thinking he lost the love of his life. One wears jeans and a t-shirt, which doesn't fit the film's time period. The movie was set in Cairo, Egypt in the 30s, and back then, locals didn't dress this way and wouldn't for decades. Fortunately, it was a compelling scene and most people didn't notice the locals wearing clothes that didn't fit the time period. Glory. One of the most powerful films about the Civil War, however, there was one significant wardrobe malfunction. A man on the bus is seen wearing a digital watch, and wristwatches of any kind weren't worn in 1863. And it would have been another 53 years where wearing a watch became popular. The hand in the picture could be an extra, and he failed to remove the watch before filming began. The hand was seen on screen for just a few seconds, so many people didn't notice. Braveheart. Braveheart was an epic war movie starring Mel Gibson. Who could forget the scene where he prepares his troops for battle with a moving speech? The movie was great, but there was one problem with the wardrobe. The film was set in the 13th century and the cast wore kilts. The only problem is that the kilt hadn't been invented yet and didn't come into fashion until the 16th century. They did get the Scottish face paint right, but the face paint and kilt weren't worn together. But fortunately, most people don't know this, and the wardrobe issue wasn't an issue. Dirty Dancing. Dirty Dancing was one of the best movies of the 80s. Baby, a rich girl who lived with her parents, met dancer instructor Johnny while staying at a summer resort with her parents, and the two fell in love. It was a romantic film and very popular. But the wardrobe department made one mistake. When Jennifer Grey's character dances across a bridge to practice, she's wearing short shorts. She looks great in them, but the film's set in 1963. Short shorts didn't become popular until the 70s, thanks to Patti Smith and Debbie Harry. Baby wouldn't have short shorts in the 60s, and her parents certainly wouldn't be happy about her owning something so revealing. Fortunately, fans were so blown away by the film that nobody noticed that Baby's wardrobe didn't fit the time period. The Last Samurai. The Last Samurai starred Tom Cruise as a retired U.S. officer in 1870. And he fights with Japanese samurai warriors alongside his men wearing armor. Unfortunately, the armor they wore didn't fit the time period, and Tom and the other fighters wore armor from 2 centuries earlier and would never have been wearing the same armor in 1870. Maybe the costume department or director found the armor from the film's time period boring and chose the coolest armor they could find. The Other Boleyn Girl. The costume department got Natalie Portman's wardrobe half right when they dressed her in The Other Boleyn Girl. The film was set in the 16th century France, and she wears the correct hood, but a veil should have been attached. Also, her hair should be pulled back and hidden under the veil. In the 16th century, it was considered scandalous for a woman to let her hair be seen in public, so leaving Natalie's hair down was a big mistake. Schindler's List. Schindler's List was a compelling movie about the Nazi regime and the people who were punished. Although the film was great, there's an issue with the women in the concentration camps. The women in the cast had smooth legs and armpits, but this doesn't line up with history. The women would have never been given razors because they could have been used as weapons, so the real women in concentration camps had hairy legs and armpits. Back to the Future. Back to the Future is one of the greatest movies of the 80s. In the film, Marty McFly, played by Michael J. Fox, travels back in time in a time machine and ends up in 1955. When he gets on stage to play a song at the Under the Sea dance, he plays Johnny B. Goode on an ES 345 model Gibson guitar. But this guitar wasn't manufactured until 1958, so it wouldn't have existed in 1955, which messes up the timeline. Most people were more focused on the movie than the type of guitar Marty was playing, so the era was never discussed. Pirates of the Caribbean. The first Pirates of the Caribbean film was set in the 1720s. Unfortunately, the British wearing red coats doesn't line up historically. In the 1720s, the men wore a much darker red called madder red, and the scarlet red coats were reserved for sergeants and officers. The British Army didn't wear scarlet jackets until 1747, so historically the scarlet coats on the soldiers didn't fit. The scarlet coats on the British Army weren't the only mistake in the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie, and there were another costume issue in the film when the pirates were on the ship. You can see a man over Johnny Depp's shoulder wearing a cowboy hat and white t-shirt. The film's set in the 1720s, but the first one wasn't created until 1865, and the t-shirt wasn't invented until 1898, so the man's outfit doesn't line up with history. The extra wearing the hat and t-shirt may have dressed for the wrong role, or the costume department gave him the wrong clothes, but either way, you'd think someone on set would have noticed, but they didn't, and the man remained in the film's final cut. The Empire Strikes Back. There was a wardrobe continuity error in The Empire Strikes Back. Fortunately, most people didn't pick up on it. Han Solo is seen shackled, then unshackled, then shackled again in alternating scenes. When Han Solo is frozen, he's shackled again. Also, in one of the final cutaways, he's wearing a jacket that he didn't have on before. These small details mean a lot, especially to eagle-eyed viewers who pick up on everything. The Wizard of Oz. There are plenty of mistakes in The Wizard of Oz, and one of the most obvious is the length of Dorothy's hair. It goes from medium length to very long in alternating shots, which likely happened because most movies aren't shot in order. The directors allowed Judy Garland to cut her hair while shooting the film, but today the actress would have been required to keep her hair the same length until filming was complete. Django Unchained. Jamie Foxx played the main character in Quentin Tarantino's Django Unchained. In many scenes, the actor wears a stylish pair of round sunglasses that didn't exist in America in 1858. This may not have been a mistake by the costume department because Tarantino is known for taking liberties to make his movies better, and the sunglasses may have been his idea to make Jamie Foxx look cooler. Pompeii. The film Pompeii was set in 62 AD, and many characters wore purple robes, but this would have never been done back then. In 62 AD, the dye was very expensive to make, so purple was only worn by nobility. Emperor Nero outlawed their use by anyone but him, and if anyone broke the law, they'd be sentenced to death. The men wearing purple robes in the film wouldn't have been alive long enough to tell the tale. Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. In the duel scene in the second Harry Potter film, Harry's classmates stood around watching, and they weren't supposed to be any adults present. If you look closely, an adult stands to the left in the shot. This was a casting mistake, and the man was an editor. The background was darkened in hopes that he wouldn't be seen, but if you look closely, you can tell he's way too old to be in Harry's class. Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park is an amazing movie, and the special effects were great, even over 30 years later. A lot of detail was put into the animatronic T-Rex to make it as big and scary as possible. The filmmakers paid attention to detail, but one minor thing was missed. In one shot, Alan Grant, a lead character, had perfectly combed hair. Seconds later, it was a mess. This is one minor mistake in an otherwise perfect movie, which is pretty impressive for a film. The Untouchables. The Untouchables, starring Kevin Costner, was set in the 1930s, and Kevin's suit doesn't line up historically. In the 30s, suit jackets had lapels, but they were much larger than the ones worn by the actor in the film. In the Depression era, lapels covered half the chest and came to a point. Also, the coats were double-breasted. Kevin looks great in his jacket, but it was an 80s style, and the men in the 30s wouldn't have been able to find a jacket like this one. The Mummy. The mistake in The Mummy was more of a continuity error than a wardrobe malfunction, but it's funny enough to make this list. In the scene where mummies surround the heroes, the trio starts firing at them. 1 second, you see Arden standing by Rick's left shoulder, and Jonathan stands to his right, and they magically switch sides without explanation. The director caught the error just before the film was released. He acknowledged the mistake later, explaining that a few scenes were cut and You would have seen the men change positions if the scene had remained in the final cut. Gladiator. Russell Crowe had the leading role in the Oscar-winning film Gladiator. Audiences loved the movie, and many didn't even notice the wardrobe error during the Colosseum battle. When Kevin's character, Maximus, loses his footing while battling the retired champion, he falls in the dirt, and you can see he's wearing a pair of black sports shorts under his slave clothing. It would have been hundreds of years before shorts were invented. Fast and Furious 7. Fast and Furious 7 had an incredible fight scene between Michelle Rodriguez's character, Letty, and a guard played by Ronda Rousey. Michelle took the fight scene so serious that her dress came apart shortly after the fight scene started. The film scene was so intense that Michelle walked away injured. The Wedding Singer. The Wedding Singer, starring Adam Sandler and Drew Barrymore, was set in the 80s. It's evident by the music and clothes. While the movie got most details right, Drew's haircut doesn't fit the timeline. Women's hairstyles in the 80s were very high, and the higher the hair, the better. Drew had a short, flipped bob, and women in the 80s would never have had this hairstyle. The movie was filmed in the 90s when Drew's hairstyle was trendy, but it doesn't work in an 80s movie. Almost Famous. Cameron Crowe's critically acclaimed film, Almost Famous, was about a young writer touring with a fictional band in the 70s. Although they did a great job dressing the cast for the times, there was one minor mistake that people didn't notice. During a backstage scene, you can see an extra wearing a Black Sabbath t-shirt. This may not seem like a problem because Black Sabbath was a popular group then, but the shirt the extra wore wasn't made until 1997, just 3 years before the film was made. Fortunately, most people focused more on Kate Hudson and her co-star than the extras, so the error went mostly unnoticed.